Hello, I'm Anthony Brandt. I'm here in another of our series of conversations with prominent people in the arts on the East End. And my guest today is Bob Lipsyte, who's an old friend of mine, sterling sports writer, one of the great ones. And he's versatile as well. He's written 12 young adult novels, which surprised me when I found out how many he had. He tells me that's not very many. But anyway, I was saying, wow, that's a lot of work. And he's had a remarkable career, beginning, I would say, accidentally. The title of his book is The Accidental Sports Writer. He didn't set out to be a sports writer. He just kind of fell into it and became a great one. How did you fall into it?
Well, I answered an ad. I answered an ad in the New York Times. Remember there used to be ads that said, I got my job through the New York Times?
Right.
There was a picture of Castro, was I think one of the, but I had just graduated from college. I was on my way to California to get a PhD in something important, romantic English poetry. I thought that was a socially acceptable way of getting away from Queens. And so I answered an ad in the New York Times for editorial assistant. And I went up to the Times building and they interviewed me very seriously, as if I was applying to be, you know, a squire to a knight of the round table or something like that. And they told me that these jobs were really hard to come by, and that maybe in a few months, when all the Rhodes Scholars who had these jobs, you know, went back to Oxford, there might be an opening. And I thanked them, and I went to 42nd Street, across the street, watched some cowboy movies, and went home to Queens. And as I walked in the door, my mother said, Bobby, you just had a crank call. And I said, what was that? And she said, somebody who said he was from the New York Times said if you show up tomorrow and pass the physical, you can start work tomorrow night. The physical was showing up, and I started that night as a copy boy in the sports department. I hated the job, didn't like the people, and was not really that interested in sports. However, I never left because I fell in love with the paper, with the Times. And I've been thinking about it, and I think that it was visceral because the sports department was on the 4th floor, and in the basement were the great presses.
Presses, right.
At 9 o'clock, when the first edition went to press, there was this tremendous rumbling, and the sound and vibration just came up the building, and it kind of really hit in the 4th floor in the sports department. You could feel it in your loins. And I said, whoa, this is journalism. And that part, I got to say, that part of it I really loved. And so I stayed. I stayed because it was the Times, and I loved it.
But you were a copy boy, which means literally running around the office floor, passing copy from one person to the next.
Absolutely.
Or putting it in the tubes.
There were other important things. I sharpened pencils.
Okay.
I filled out pots of paste so they could paste up stories. And of course I went out and got them coffee. And this was on the 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift.
Oh boy.
So these were kind of grumpy old men.
Right, I can imagine.
Yeah, and it was tough, but it was exhilarating. And I think the thing that really made it wonderful for me was the night rewrite reporter, 25-year-old guy named Gay Talese.
Oh boy.
And so, in effect, I was his copy boy on that shift.
Right.
He would send me out to get his cocoa. No coffee or tea for Gay Talese. And cocoa is not hot chocolate, Bob. Cocoa is made with milk, not with water.
Right.
So did you imagine how many delis I had to go to get Gay Talese's? But it was absolutely worth it, because then I'd go back, with my offering, and he was incredibly generous with time and advice. And he was, it was my first class in journalism, was listening to Gay.
Were you thinking about writing pieces and covering stories?
Well, not right away,
Yeah,
but as he talked,
right.
and he made it seem possible.
Right.
Hey, you're as smart as these jerks. You can
Right.
do this.
Right.
And this is how you sneak into the morgue to find out, and these are the kind of people you should
Right.
talk to, the sergeants and the colonels who know what, and he was a master politician and
Right.
researcher, just all around generous, smart, nice guy. And the first piece I did, I was still a copy boy, and I didn't even have a byline. They had a feature in those days called Topics of the Times, and they kind of ran on the editorial page, unsigned. And I wrote one about January. Janus is a two-faced god. That's all I remember from it. and the thrill of that, and then of course later on a byline, but just the thrill of that was enough to buy another couple of years hanging around.
To have a byline in the Times, that's got to be a thrill.
Oh, it was, yeah.
Yeah, I never tried to be a newspaper person.
Why?
Because I didn't think it was a worthy occupation.
Oh, thank you.
for a Princeton grad. I wanted to be a...
Columbia is low enough on the totem pole that we can work at the Times.
No, I just had an exalted idea of who I was, and I thought...
You sure did.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't apologize
Robert
for it.
Caro of the same New Jersey institution,
Yeah,
he
he
worked
was-
at Newsday, a
That's right.
lesser newspaper.
That's right. And he worked at an even lesser newspaper in New Jersey before he went to Newsday. So
You can
I should be
apologize later.
I should be ashamed of myself.
You should. It's a good thing you had a good career as a writer, or I'd really get on your back.
But after that, you did start. You started in a way that I found. Really, there was so much luck involved when they sent you to Florida to cover the LE. Who was it?
Well, before that,
Floyd Patterson fight.
Yeah, before that, they sent me to Florida to cover the first spring training of the New York Mets in 1962.
Oh, okay.
So I was 24.
Right.
And the Times was changing, and this was a lot in sports, it had a lot to do with Talese's influence. He had by now gone on to Esquire.
Right.
I was kind of his replacement. And they were now not so much interested in sports writers who knew what they were writing about. I didn't know. But sports writers who could write. Basically, we were feature writers.
Yeah.
Which I was. And so that was perfect for me. I mean, the timing was so right. So they sent me to cover spring training for the Mets, and then some of the Mets that season. And so I wrote features about the Mets, which was really, I lucked in there. The only way to cover them, they were so bad that there was no way to cover the New York Mets seriously in any statistical way. I mean, to kind of, tease out, how they played the X's and O's of their game. It's impossible. So that worked out really well. But the big one, which you were just alluded to, was in 1964 when Cassius Clay challenged Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship. And the Times boxing writer, very important man. I mean, this is 1964. Boxing was important.
Yes,
The
it
heavyweight
was.
champion
That's
of the
right.
world was Mr. Man. The boxing writer at a newspaper was a rather exalted veteran
Yeah.
of the scene. So this guy didn't think it was worth his time to
Really?
go all the way down to Florida because Cassius Clay was going to be knocked out in the first round. Sonny
Right.
Liston had knocked out Floyd Patterson, everybody else in the first round. And so in his immortal words, the boxing writer, thank you, said, "Send the kid. He's not doing anything." So I was a kid. I had taken over
Yeah,
Gay
you were-
Talisa's night rewrite duties.
You were what, 25, 26?
26.
Yeah.
And so that was perfect because I was closer to Cassius's age.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the scene. Most of the writers down there were veterans, seasoned reporters, older, and they gravitated towards Sonny Liston, who had Joe Louis in his camp.
Yes.
Joe Louis's wife was his lawyer.
And Sonny was the story, as far as they
He
could
was the
tell.
story, yeah. And it was really understood that Cassius Clay was a sacrificial lamb to the box office. We needed somebody for Sonny to beat up. And the odds was 7-1, which is prohibitive
Yeah, that's
in
huge.
boxing. And of the, I don't know, there's something like 21, 22 writers at ringside, and 20 of them predicted a first round knockout. And, but the first shock, well, the week leading up to it was a feature writer's dream.
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
Well, the Beatles came in, didn't they?
yeah,
That's incredible.
that was incredible. That was my first moment there. So my instructions were, as soon as I got to Miami, rent a car at the airport and drive back and forth several times between the convention hall where the fight was being held and the nearest hospital, because they didn't want me wasting any deadline time following Cassius Clay into intensive care.
Right.
And I did that. And then I drive to this ramshackle gym in what is now South Beach, and where he trained. I had never met Cassius Clay. I walk up the stairs, and there's commotion behind me, and there's 4 little guys, my age, I guess. They're wearing matching white terry cloth cabana jackets, and they're being pushed up the stairs behind me. And I get
Who was
pushed with
pushing
them.
their manager or something?
No, cops were pushing them
Oh,
up.
cops.
Yeah. I didn't know the backstory.
Yeah.
But the backstory was they had been set up with a big publicity picture with Sonny Liston. And Liston took one look at them and said, "I ain't posing with them sissies." So they got stuffed back into their limo and driven down to the south end of the island
Yeah.
to take a second best shot
Right.
with Cassius Clay, who wasn't there yet. He was late. And the moment these 4 guys, realized that he wasn't late, he was late, and they were being pushed up because Cassius Clay's people really wanted that
Yeah.
publicity shot.
Yeah.
They started screaming and ranting and cursing, but these 2 big whack-and-hut cops just kind of pushed them up the stairs and into a deserted dressing room. And I figured, hey, I'd get a paragraph out of this, so I kind of let myself get pushed in with them, and they closed the door behind us, and they went nuts. They were screaming. They were very foul-mouthed little guys. They were screaming and banging on the door and banging on the walls, and I kind of quieted them down. I said, "Excuse me, I'm Robert Lipsyte of the New York Times." And I was wearing a tie. And so,
Right.
And I remember it was like John who said, "Hi, I'm Ringo." I mean, this I figured out later. I didn't really know who they were. And Ringo said, "Yeah, I'm George." And then they started screaming, and I said, "Well, who do you think is going to win this fight?" And, "Oh, they're going to knock that wanker out in 1." And they're banging and screaming. And then this went on for like 10 or 15 minutes. door bursts open. And this is true. We all gasped. Us five Beatles, we all gasped because here, framed in the doorway, was absolutely the most beautiful creature we had ever seen in our lives. You know, because at 22,
Yeah,
he glowed.
Yeah, he was good looking.
Glowed. He was beautiful, and he leaned in, and he said, "Come on, Beatles, let's go make some money." And this could have been choreographed. They followed him out like kindergarten kids into the ring. And this is on YouTube, Cassius Clay and the Beatles. Check it out. Although not while we're on the air.
No,
Yeah.
I won't run home and do that.
Please wait. Yeah. And they capered around the ring. They lined up, and he tapped the first one, and they kind of went down like dominoes. They formed a pyramid to try to hit him in the face. It was magical.
I can imagine.
And then it was over, and they leave. God knows what happened to those boys. And he goes into his workout.
Right.
And he does his workout. So then after his workout is over, he goes back to get his massage in that dressing room where we had been locked in. And he sees me there, and we had still never met. And he said, "You were here with them?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "So who were those little sissies?" It's amazing.
And you didn't really know.
No, he knew that there was somebody called the Beatles, but who were the Beatles? And
Right.
this was their first American visit.
Right.
And of course, you know, within minutes, they were going to be as big as he was going to be.
Yes.
So to me, that was when the 1960s began, that day.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So this is like February 25, 1964, something like that. Kennedy's dead, ending the 50s, and here we are. But, and then of course, the next amazing moment was just before the fight begins, when the two fighters come into the ring and kind of shake hands and hear the ring instructions from the referee. Everybody suddenly realized Cassius Clay was a lot bigger.
Bigger than Liston, yes.
You know, hey, we're into this David and Goliath story. What happened? And then, of course, in what I consider the greatest career move for me, Cassius Clay becomes heavyweight champion of the world. I become the boxing writer.
Yes.
And
what happened to the old guy who was the veteran?
Jack, Joe Nichols was his name.
Uh-huh.
He's a lovely, lovely guy. He couldn't have been warmer and more gracious about the whole thing.
Right.
And he becomes the Times horse racing writer, which is an even better job. So everything worked out for everybody.
Right.
And then, so being boxing writer, you know, for those years meant covering Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful introduction to everything else. And I mean, in a sense, then it was an opportunity to become the kind of sports writer it was fun to be.
Yeah, a feature writer, basically.
A feature writer, but also the way his life intersected politics, race,
Right.
you know,
He
the
was
social
remarkable.
order.
Yes, right.
Just
whole thing.
everything.
Yeah.
You know, we traveled around the world. It was fascinating, and the people, you know, Malcolm X, Harry Belafonte. I mean, you know, the people in the periphery.
Yeah, the black elite, you might say.
Yes, I mean, it was an enormous education. It was really, and at the same time, I was writing Dick Gregory's autobiography, a book whose name, according to the Library of Congress, we can't mention. Of course, it's Nigger.
Right.
And so, and they were close, Ali and Gregory. So the combination of those two kind of even potentiated further my education. And so it was just kind of a wonderful time. So I stayed this summer job. I never got to California for my PhD. The summer job lasted until 1971, about 12 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah, and
By which time you had become a star on the paper.
well, yeah, but more than that, I realized something had happened to my head. The fight of the century, the night that he fought Joe Frazier in 1971. I was a columnist by this time. It was not a column night, so my job that night was to sit at ringside with a microphone and broadcast back to the Times sports desk, punch by punch, what was happening, so that they could prepare a replate or an extra edition, depending on who won. And within a round or two, I kind of became a play-by-play announcer. I got into it, and I got patched into the whole Times building.
Right.
And then, I'm sure this was illegal, parts of Times Square.
Really? We're listening to you?
Yeah, we're listening to me.
That's incredible.
It was incredible. But what was even more incredible is that everybody who heard my broadcast was convinced that Muhammad Ali had won big. That I was so emotionally biased towards my story.
Yeah, this is your story and your guy too.
Yeah, exactly. And when all that played out afterwards, and I got the feedback and heard somebody had taped it and listened to it, and I think it's over. I'm toast here. I really can't do this. I mean, it could happen again. I could fall in love with another subject, and you can't do that.
No, you can't.
And so I quit. And that was that. And it was
You were
sad
married.
and liberating. I was married and I had 2 toddlers, yeah. But
Good move, Bob.
yeah. They like macaroni and cheese. Yeah, it worked out because by then I had started writing young adult novels,
Right.
which had come out of my boxing experience. I mean, it really flowed out of that. I'll tell you the story.
Tell me the story.
Yeah, so it's the night of the Ali-Floyd Patterson fight, Las Vegas. His old boxing manager, roomy eyes,
Yeah.
creeping along, kind of stereotypical guy. Much younger than I am now, of course, but he really, to me, seemed incredibly old. I take him out to dinner. I feel sorry for him. And we go to dinner, and then we go back to the casino hotel where we're both staying. He's getting what's called walking around money from the promoter to walk around, and maybe a sympathetic sports writer will take him out to dinner and get a story. That was me. So we're sitting in the abandoned, dark pool of the hotel, and he begins this stream of consciousness about a gym that he had owned when he was young, the Gramercy Gym, on 114th Street in Manhattan. And it was then a very tough neighborhood. It was up 3 dark, twisting flights of stairs. And he slept in the gym. He slept on a cot near the door with a gun and a German Shepherd.
Doubly armed.
It was that kind of, but he was listening, not just for miscreants, but he was listening for the kid who had come up those stairs slowly, because he was scared, alone, because nobody was pushing him up, and at night, because he didn't want anybody to see what he was doing. But he had conquered his fear to come up and to learn how to fight, to learn how to become somebody, to learn how to become a contender. And then he goes into this long riff about, it's great to be champion, but being champion is kind of luck. The right fight at the end, somebody who maneuvers you in the right fights and all. But to be a contender, a guy coming up, a guy who never gives up, a guy who wants to be somebody, conquers his fear, that's something important.
Right.
And that's what he's looking for, contenders.
Yeah, that's straight out of the movies.
No, it
No?
came from him first.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This was 1965.
I could have been a contender.
It was 1965.
Right,
It was
okay.
before all that stuff. So I'm mesmerized, and you know, I barely see the fight. I'm just thinking about these images, the stairs, the kid. What kind of kid would come up those stairs? What would happen to him? You know, on and on and on. So I get back to the office after the fight, and he has a letter waiting from Harper and Row.
Oh, okay.
And from a man I didn't know named Ferdinand Monjo. And he wrote a letter, and the letter was almost in italics, you know. Like, my dear boy, we have really enjoyed your boxing reportage. Would you be interested in writing a novel with boxing as its milieu? A word I can't pronounce or know how to spell. You went to Princeton?
Yeah.
You must know how to spell.
I'm sure I do.
Yeah, right. or did at one time.
Right.
And so I was thrilled, and in my naivete, I considered that was like a contract. So I called him up and I said, "Yeah, Mr. Monjo, yeah, I'm ready to go. It's a novel about a kid who comes up some stairs, and the name of the book is The Contender." And he said, "Go at it, young man."
Go at it, young
Go
man.
at it, young man. So I did. I just sat down and wrote the book, and that started.
And you've been doing that ever since.
Yeah, and that's really started my young adult career. I have to say, I came just at the moment when young adult literature was being invented. So I get some of the credit of being an early, writer of young adult. Harper and Row, now Harper and Collins, of course.
Right.
Harper and Row was inventing the genre to pay off its fabulously successful children's book.
Right.
It had some very famous editors, Charlotte Zolotow, Ursula Nordstrom, and the first two real YA books were The Contender and S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders, which was really the book.
That was huge. I remember that.
Huge.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a wonderful start. And that book came out just before I left the Times, so I did have something to do.
You had a cushion of some kind, and you could write more books once this one.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Although I wasn't going to. I mean,
this was a
well,
one-off.
because I thought it was a novel, right? So then they tell me when I finish it, they love it, that it's this thing that they've invented, young adult. And, I wanted to write King Lear, not Kid Lear.
Right.
So I said, well, wait a minute. So they said, no, this will be great, and we'll just have to take out your little sex scene. I got, my kid had a little sex. And there was kind of a Black Panther scene that was kind of toned down and things like that. But the book was very successful. For one of the reasons, the main reason, is there was a real push to publish and for librarians to buy books with minority candidates. Minority
characters.
And this was kind of one of the first of that. And it was great. So I went into a lot of classrooms,
to read
to
or to
read
talk
and like that. And half the time they were relieved that I was white, and half the time cruelly disappointed that I was white. I could not write that book today.
Because?
I would not, no one would publish it, because I don't think that a white writer would be allowed to appropriate the life of a young black boy. I mean, I felt that I really knew about this. I was approaching it as a reporter. I had followed so many of these young black boy boxers home to Harlem. and I spent so much time with Dick Gregory, and I really felt comfortable in the milieu. But I don't think that, and it's too bad. I mean, it's not too bad in the sense that there are wonderful black writers who can do a better job now, but it's too bad that there's any kind of interference with that kind of artistic expression, that, you know, women can't write about men, men about women,
No,
Indians
it's insane.
about
It's
you know,
insane.
Pakistanis. Where does it begin and end?
I totally agree. It's insane.
Yeah.
And I'm an old white guy, and who knows what I want to write? I'm trying to write a children's book that's very dark.
Yeah.
Who does that? So it's
You might be okay. I mean, a dark children. Yeah, a white guy, old white guy.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I want to hear more about that.
Well, not today.
Okay, on my program.
Yes. You had a program for a while, didn't you?
I did. It was wonderful fun. It was called The 11th Hour.
Right.
It was a nightly public affairs show on Channel 13. And it was very exciting and interesting, especially when it was live and we had, you know, political figures come on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ultimately Channel 13 was embarrassed by it. Too many minorities. It might have been a little too leftish for them. But what they really wanted was a national exposure. We were very much a local New York
that's true
program.
for a long time.
Yeah, and they wanted a national exposure. So they canceled us. We won. Actually, we won Emmys. The show won Emmys. I won Emmys. Everybody won Emmys. And then we were canceled. And they hired some guy. I don't know whatever happened to him. Some guy, his last name was a flower.
Well, some kind of flower.
Yeah.
Mr. Rose, Mr.
That was it, Charlie Rose.
Charlie Rose. Oh,
Yeah,
the
I don't
infamous
know.
Charlie Rose.
I don't know how that worked out. But
You never heard of him since, right?
that's who replaced us for many, many years.
Yeah.
And until he replaced himself.
Yes, he did that very effectively, didn't
Yeah, he did. I did not feel bad.
Didn't you also have a show that was about old age or?
Yes. It was called Life Part 2.
Right.
And it was a nice show. It was on PBS
Right.
nationally. And it was really about coming to terms and having fun being old.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of experts, and it was a nice show. It came out of Minneapolis, and I think that the station there decided that they would do better making that an online site instead of a television show. And they may well be right. They have a very nice online site called Next Avenue. I think that after Sesame Street comes Next Avenue. And with a lot of good advice about getting old.
Right. I
Which
think I
is-
saw one show that was
Yeah.
here, but I don't remember a thing about it. I made it.
It's television.
So you've done a lot of other sports besides boxing.
Oh, yeah.
You've done.
I've done the Olympics, baseball,
You've
Le
done-
Mans.
You've
A
done
lo-
lacrosse.
and I spent a year-
You did lacrosse.
Oh yeah, I mean I've covered just about everything, the Highland Games in Scotland. The thing other than boxing that I really dove into was I was writing a column, but I spent most of that year writing about NASCAR.
Yeah, I remember reading that. That's in this book.
Yeah,
And it's,
this I had a wonderful sports editor named Neil Amdur who had a genius for knowing what would be hot next week.
Mm-hmm.
And he called me in, and we both agreed that the column was getting just a little stale, because I was getting very political and going back over, you know, this and Ali and he said, why don't you try something that's out of your comfort zone?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you go to NASCAR? And I struggled a little bit, but then I went down and spent the month of January in Charlotte, North Carolina, just hanging around the garages of the top drivers. And so if you're a baseball writer or a football writer and you go up to a player or a coach and say, could you really explain, your reason for this play? They would kind of, why doesn't your editor send somebody who knows something?
Right.
But NASCAR, you go up to the top driver or a garage mechanic and say, why are there those holes in the top of the carburetor?
Right.
And they'll say, do you have a couple of minutes? I'd like to draw you a diagram. And that's the rest of the day.
Right.
And they were so generous with their time and open, and they wanted to sell their sport, of course.
Yeah.
So I felt this was really wonderful. And then I got a ride along where you kind of cram yourself. There's no second seat, but you cram yourself into the front of a race car, and once it gets up to around 180 miles an hour, you're just kind of mesmerized. You want more of this. So then I came back in February with a commitment that I would really, more or less, not every column, but I would keep dropping back. My first commitment was the Daytona 500, 2001. And I'm sitting I had spent the whole night. The story that I was writing was on the NASCAR subculture, which meant spending the whole night in the infield. The track surrounds, acres and acres of land, which you can get to by tunnel, where people sleep overnight in the back of their pickup trucks on the ground in $1 million recreational vehicles, and then often watch the race from the ceilings of their recreational vehicles. And night in the infield, as it's called, is really kind of a world of its own. Everybody's plastered, and they're screaming. And there are some knife fights, and guys run around screaming, "Show me your," and girls go, "Sure." And it's kind of an amazing scene.
Yeah.
And I interviewed people, and
Right.
and there were family groups there who would put their hands over their kids' eyes when the girls went like that. So I was sitting in the press box, putting the finishing touches on my big NASCAR subculture story. When Dale Earnhardt's car slammed into the wall right under where I was sitting. And I looked over, and didn't look like too much. Just kind of banged into the wall. And suddenly, everybody in the press box started crying, except me. I didn't know. And then people ran out and threw a blue tarpaulin over his car so people couldn't see in. And suddenly I knew that I had a different story to write that day.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my introduction to NASCAR. It was a front page story, and of course, this is grotesque. It's like a noir children's book. What it was suddenly everybody knew what NASCAR was. Now the Times, as I said, it was a front page story, but the headline did not say Dale Earnhardt dies, because the assumption was our audience would not know what a Dale Earnhardt was. So it was famous stock car driver killed in crash. But as the days went on, everybody found out who Dale was. And
well, you told them, I assume.
That became, in a sense, I became the boxing. I mean, it happened again. I mean, in some ways, it was kind of thrilling. So, I mean, so now I'm in my 60s. I'm in my 60s. And
I don't think I knew you then.
2001, 2002.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. My writing life was starting again.
Mm-hmm. And you had gone back to the times when?
I went back to the times in 1991.
Okay.
I was gone for exactly 20 years.
20 years, okay.
Right. And I just started writing the column again. I just said I had gone out for a cigar and I was back. And it was kind of wonderful because in some ways nothing had changed. In some ways everything had changed.
Well, they changed the building, didn't they? Didn't they move?
Not yet.
They were about to?
Yeah, no, that didn't happen for a few years, for another 10 years or so. No, we were still in the old building. We were on a different floor, and of course, the presses were not rumbling in the basement anymore. I didn't feel that feeling in my loins, but then I didn't go in very often. I wrote at home mostly, or on the road. But it was very exciting to start my career all over again, you know, knowing what I know now, and being interested in different things. I mean, I would never have written NASCAR back then.
Right.
It was beneath me. But
Exactly.
now it was like being a foreign correspondent, and that was thrilling. And so it was another 12, 13 years until I was fired. And so a real, we don't use words like this here, but a real jerk named Howell Raines.
Oh, yes.
Became editor of the
famous
Times.
Howell Raines.
Huh?
The famous Howell Raines.
Yeah, it was. I think publishers become besotted with swaggering editors.
Could be.
And hire them.
He was a Southern.
He was Southern. He was macho. He's a little guy. He was a bantam. And the first thing he did, well, just before he actually took over, several days before he took over, he took the whole sports department out to lunch. You know, 50 people. And you know, being sports writers, we just assumed he was a swaggering little bully. We had no other thoughts. Because he told us that he was going to run the Times the way Bear Bryant ran the University of Alabama football team.
Oh, dear.
And I remember making a joke to the guy next to me. He said, "No water while we're writing?" And he went on like that. You know, we're going to be tough. We're going to flood the zone. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And we thought he was just kind of jock posturing to the sports department. We didn't realize that was him. And this was a guy who liked to make women cry during meetings. And
oh, dear.
yeah, he was terrible. But one thing, and he wanted to talk to me, and one thing he told me was that college football was the glue that kept America together. And I thought he was joking. I mean, pretty funny.
Right.
Yeah. So, but you know, cool. And so not too much later, I went down to Marshall University in West Virginia for kind of a crazy feature story about the making of bobblehead dolls. Their hot quarterback was having a bobblehead doll. So I went down there, and it was really kind of fun because I stayed with the quarterback. We spent all this time going to movies, so I went to movies with him, never went to class. I stayed in a hotel that was owned by the biggest booster of Marshall, and I ate all my meals in this steakhouse owned by the coach of the football team.
Incestuous little group.
And the booster wanted me to know, see, you're a good guy, you should know this, that you know he really takes care of the boys, that he gets them no-show jobs in the summertime, and he makes sure that everybody has enough money to take girls out on dates and have a good time and stay with the team. Okay. So what do you do when you're down there and you hear all this stuff? So
Yeah, you write it up.
you write it,
God,
yeah. I mean,
yes.
it's not even as if anybody said this is off the record.
Right.
They were very proud of all of this. So yeah, so then there's a big
big hoo-ha,
fuss.
right?
And I hear that Howell Raines is really very angry because it's as if I'm defying
The culture,
the culture and the idea that the glue
right?
is holding America together. So when my contract came up for renewal, it was not renewed. And I was angry, and I was heartbroken in a way. And then 6 months later, he was fired.
Right.
And the next day, I was brought back, which was really very nice. But it was ceremonial because in those 6 months, I had lost the loving feeling and kind of moved on
Right.
to other things. I mean, I didn't really want to go back anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Twice
so
is enough.
Twice was enough, and you know, 2 wonderful runs. So it was a wonderful time. It's a wonderful paper. I mean, whatever people, you know, there are lots of things to attack, but thank God right now we have the Times and the Washington Post
Yeah.
and a few NPR and a few other places.
No, they are saving the country right now.
They are absolutely saving. They're keeping the country afloat.
Yes, sane.
Yeah, at least you have somewhere to look
You can
to.
go for the truth. Yes.
Or
you can rely on it.
as close to the truth as we ever get.
Well,
Yeah.
truth is always in quotes.
Yeah, but you know, having been inside that place for so many years, the kind of seriousness, the kind of sense of stewardship the publishers have, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, what's amazing is that everybody doesn't have that. That you can have a whole Republican Party who are, you know, in a sense, emotionally corrupted
Yeah.
and fearful and not ready to be American citizens.
That's right. And certainly not ready to hold the power that they
Yeah.
have.
And you know, I think one thing about sports writing now is more and more young, better educated. I think there are more good sports writers now than there have ever been, although you don't get to see them
Yeah.
in showcased places. They're all in little online places. And they know how to connect the dots of our social and political lives and sports. So, I mean, there's a movement, the stick to sports movement, which is very real and very oppressive, in which some really wonderfully talented, Jamel Hill at ESPN was a big example, talented people are driven out of sports writing because they're connecting the dots, that you can't write about a game, the X's and O's of a game. You know, did he break his route? Why was he in the flat when he threw that pass? But you can't write that stuff anymore unless somewhere along the way, you know, you connect it to, you know, why was the owner, you know, arrested for having alleged sex in a massage parlor, you know, a couple of hours before a game.
That's right. Yeah, I did some sports writing, not very much, but I did it for magazines.
Yeah.
I was asked to write about various minor sports, Olympic sports, at the time of one of the Olympics games. And so I was flown around the country and went to the training center in Colorado, and I found it fascinating.
But you didn't stay with it.
No, it was just an assignment, and it's not natural to me. But I could do it. But there were, you know, skeet shooting. You have to go out and actually do it yourself to find out what it's like and how difficult it is.
Right.
And archery, I was terrible at archery. Fencing, you know, I did all those things. They gave me these assignments, and I did what I could, and I had a good time. And I thought, this is a lot of fun. But I don't think I knew you then, so this is not something.
I would have persuaded you to stay at it.
No, I didn't have the audience for it. So
It's tough. Sports writing is tough. One of my all-time favorite sports writers is the sports editor of the East Hampton Star. His name is Jack Graves. What I love about Jack, and he's a really fine literary writer. You can see that in his column in the Star. But what he's able to do is he's able to, every week, he can write about these high school kids
yeah,
who are playing sports, and he can cover what they do in a kind of kindly, sympathetic, almost dispassionate way, without patronizing them,
Right.
as, or godding them up,
yeah,
as
Right.
the future.
right,
And I think to be able to do that is really very important. I mean, the big problem in sports really is in a lower level now. It's not the pros. It's in the lower. It's in Pee Wee where the kids start getting their heads banged,
yes,
and where the brain damage begins.
Right.
And then it's in what's something called travel teams, which becomes very expensive for parents and is really kind of run on a pro model where kids are all stars, or they sit home, or they are promoted, or they get Nike sneakers,
yeah,
and everything pushing towards the future. So that I think about me as a kid, the fat boys in Queens, who never get a chance, for something as basically healthful and ennobling as sports, because all the resources and money and energy, is going to the pre-pros.
yeah,
So I mean, that's so important in sports, but that's not as exciting as Tom Brady and the Patriots.
I know, and they're starting to lose now, and Tom is 43 years old or whatever.
Well, I think, but on the other hand, maybe he's an inspiration to us older guys.
Could be.
So let's not put down Tom Brady too fast. So his big competition, Patrick Mahomes, is only 24.
Right.
So do we want to promote him?
No, I guess we don't.
He's our kid. He's our grandkid.
Yeah. I have 2 grandkids, and neither one of them is athletic in the least, which is fine. I never was in school.
My grandkids are very athletic, and one of them is a star soccer player. I don't know how to deal with it.
Well, we've about run out of time, so I think I know we could go on forever talking about this
I have
stuff.
a feeling.
So I'm going to call it off. It's been wonderful to have you
Thank
on
you.
the show. Really, you've been a great pleasure, and I knew you would be. I knew you'd carry the show. Let's put it that
But
way.
your questions were perfect.
Yeah. Well, that's it, folks. We're done for today. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you.